The accusations against besieged Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore have reached sufficient fever pitch to attract blood-sucking harpy Gloria Allred. Brutal new testimony just this hour from an alleged victim. That said, Moore's attackers on the left have one intractable, desiccated, undead obstacle to their moralizing: Hillary Clinton, my third cousin once removed. We will analyze love in the time of fake news. Then, roaming millennial, Amber Athey, and Paul Bois, His Eminence himself, join the panel of deplorables to discuss short, fat Kim Jong-un, why you should boycott Keurig, and a New York Times writer's passionate defense of racial segregation. The New York Times is a former newspaper now, a former newspaper tomorrow, a former newspaper forever. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is The Michael Knowles Show. That Gloria Allred press conference came out about 20 minutes ago. It came out as we were ready to go on air. There is a woman who's now alleging that when she was 15, she was molested by Roy Moore. It was a sexual assault. There was nothing consensual about it. So this leaves Roy Moore with only one option. He has to come out as gay. He has to choose now to live as a gay man. We will have Christopher Plummer replace him as the Republican nominee in Alabama. I think that's the only way that we can handle this and still possibly win this seat. Plummer 2017, that's the way to do it. There's your write-in campaign right there. This Allred presser, if you haven't seen it, is savage. It is brutal. The Democrats have played this opposition research perfectly. With accusations that haven't come out for 40 years. They've just played it right up to the election. They've built up. They've let him bury himself. And this is really rough. The woman's name is Beverly Young Nelson. She says that when she was 15, she was a beauty pageant queen who was working at a diner, and Roy Moore would come in there. He was the DA for the county at the time. He would come in. He was always hitting on her, asking her to go out with him. She said no. One time, he waited for her to leave the restaurant and offered to give her a ride home because her boyfriend wasn't there. According to this woman, he drove her around back where there were no lights and made a move, tried to lock the door, fondled her. Eventually, she said no, fought back long enough that she fell out of the car. He pushed her out of the car and said, "You're just a child. I'm the DA. No one will ever believe you. Your mother will never believe you." Apparently, her sister attests to this at the time, some friends. She and her husband, crucially, voted for Trump. So this is one point she said, "I'm willing to go under oath on this. This isn't a Republican-Democrat thing. I and my husband both voted for Trump." This is really, really bad. Much worse than the Washington Post story. Much worse than unnamed women, some women on the record, some women off, alleging weird conduct when they were 16 or 17 or 18. This is brutal. It's graphic. It's going to be run on every TV in Alabama for the next few weeks. Mitch McConnell, by the way, before this press conference, had already called for Roy Moore to drop out of the race. The White House has backed off of Roy Moore. You'll remember Trump didn't endorse Roy Moore in the primary. He endorsed Luther Strange, the primary opponent. Here is Moore defending himself. Now, this clip is from before the Gloria Allred presser today, but I imagine he won't really change his tune very much. This is Roy Moore's defense.
The Washington Post published yet another attack on my character and reputation in a desperate attempt to stop my political campaign for the United States Senate. These attacks involve a minor, and they are completely false and untrue. I want to make it clear to the media present and to the people present. I have not provided alcoholic beverages, beer, or anything else to a minor. I have not been guilty of sexual misconduct with anyone. I've been investigated more than any other person in this country. To think that grown women would wait 40 years to come right before an election to bring charges is absolutely unbelievable. Why now? The Democrats and the Republican establishment know the importance of this election. In fact, most people in America know the importance of this election. They see it as a prelude to the elections coming in 2018. It may very well determine the future of our country. My opponent is 11 points behind. That came out just days before this article came out. They're desperate. This article is a prime example of fake news.
Fake news. That's Roy Moore's story, and he's sticking to it. A decent enough defense. What else is he going to say? He can't cop to it, then he loses the race. He can't drop out now. No one's going to win in his place. It'll just go to Democrats. So he's saying this is all fake news and don't worry about it. A much harder case to make now that we have a woman on the record who's apparently a Republican, apparently a Trump voter, who's coming out and making these accusations. Now, Gloria Allred is not the only blood-sucking harpy involved in all of this. There is one intractable problem for Democrats, and that is Hillary Clinton. So Chris Hayes, a stop clock is right twice a day, MSNBC Chris Hayes came out and tweeted this over the weekend, quote, "As gross and cynical and hypocritical as the right's what about Bill Clinton stuff is, it's also true that Democrats and the center-left are overdue for a real reckoning with the allegations against him. Read this account," he's talking about Juanita Broaddrick, "in light of all we've been hearing and reading this last month, and ask yourself if it is credible." Now, he's talking about this accusation by a woman named Juanita Broaddrick that says that Bill Clinton raped her decades ago, and Hillary knew about it, and Hillary pressured her to keep quiet. And this has come out for years with the Clintons. Now we have Democrats finally copping and saying, well, maybe that's the case. Why are they doing it? Might be true that they want to get Hillary out of here. They're pulling it down to Brazil. They want to toss her under the bus, get rid of Hillary Clinton as fast as we can, move on to better pastures for 2020. But if that's the case, it takes the wind out of their sails of all of their moralizing. They've been saying all weekend, how could you possibly not call for Roy Moore to get out of the race, to drop out, to go away? This was before the most recent accusations, when it was just a Washington Post story. How could you not? It's awful. We're the moral voice of America. But just a year ago, they tried to make a woman who pressured and intimidated and bullied and smeared her husband's alleged rape victims, they tried to make her president. So much for all that moralizing. Where's that high horse? Where was all that moralism a year ago when you were trying to make that woman who's accused of worse things, when you were trying to make her president? The guy I blame most in all of this, obviously we can go back and forth. The Clinton thing is a really nice tool at the right's disposal because we can say, well, look, folks, political races are complicated, and there are more reasons than just accusations from 40 years ago to vote for a guy. Probably that argument's not going to hold anymore after the most recent presser and accusations, but we'll see what happens. The guy I blame most in all of this is Luther Strange, the primary opponent that Trump endorsed and the establishment endorsed in Alabama. He failed as a campaign. His campaign failed to dig up all of this dirt unless all of these accusations are totally fabricated. And again, I wouldn't put it past Democrats to totally fabricate accusations weeks before an election when you're down by double digits. But unless they are totally fabricated, Luther Strange blew it because he could have found all of this. I've been to meetings like this. You go to the other campaign, you say, we have this information. They say, okay, they decide whether or not to drop out. If they don't privately drop out, then you release the information, it goes public, and then you see what's happening to Roy Moore now would have happened months ago. The Strange campaign didn't do it. It's really frustrating. We might lose the Senate seat now. It looks like we're probably going to. Really, really awful. And all of this said, sex scandals are a hallmark of American politics. I think it's easy to say, well, now what has happened? Trump has reduced the nation to rubble, or Bill Clinton has reduced the nation to rubble, or now we have all these sex scandals, but it used to be so nice and we'd court people and it was hunky-dory and gentlemanly and chivalrous. Not true. Sex scandals have been a hallmark of American politics since the beginning. Alexander Hamilton, Washington's aide-de-camp and the founder of the Treasury Department, he cuckolded a man named James Reynolds in 1791. This came out. It damaged his political career. A mid-19th century South Carolina senator from the Nullifier Party had a gay relationship in college. And then he had a little dalliance, as he said, with his two teenage nieces. He couldn't run for re-election the next time, but he was re-elected to the Senate a few years later. Senator David Walsh, a Democrat from Massachusetts, visited gay Nazi brothels. In America, you can go to gay brothels, you can go to Nazi brothels. You cannot go to gay Nazi brothels. That's a step too far. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas was thrice married, cheated on all of the wives, and molested airline stewardesses. There's nothing really new about all of this. That said, it's going to have consequences, and this might have been the nail in the coffin for Mr. Moore. Now, we've got to analyze all of this. We have to bring on Roaming Millennial, with us since the beginning, Roaming Millennial, to give us expert advice, Amber Athey from the Daily Caller, and His Eminence, the one and only Paul Cardinal Bois. Panel, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Roaming, is Roy Moore finished?
I'm having a lot of trouble with this. I'm someone who thought it was extremely hypocritical when, during the election, Democrats turned a blind eye to Bill Clinton. And I also was someone who was very skeptical about a lot of the allegations that were coming out against Trump. With that being said, I'm trying to look at this fairly and objectively and not see Moore as a Republican, but rather just someone who's having all of these allegations against him that, you know, right now are hearsay. But I mean, it's not just one person at this point. I don't think it's good for the Republican image if he stays in this race and if people continue to stand by him. And this isn't to say that I think he's definitely guilty. I don't think we should abandon presumption of innocence just because this is a political matter. And, you know, we're fighting for the elections in 2018. But at the same time, yeah, this doesn't look good. And for a lot of people, Republicans already have the image, whether it's true or not, I don't think it's true, of being soft on men who sexually harass and sexually abuse women. And I don't think Roy Moore is good for the party right now.
That might be the case, but if he isn't guilty, then should we allow ourselves to be bullied by Gloria Allred? If he isn't guilty, I understand it says, well, it's easy, there are all these accusations, let's dump him under the bus. But what if he isn't guilty? Then doesn't that set a precedent for all campaigns? That said, no, it doesn't look good for Moore in this particular, but in the general, if they're just unsubstantiated, if we don't have a lot of evidence, should we really automatically believe Gloria Allred and her clients?
I don't believe these women without evidence. I think if you're making allegations against someone, it's up to you. You have burden of proof to substantiate your claims. But at the same time, if we are actually interested in pushing forward conservative principles through electing legislators, then people, including Roy Moore himself, need to realize that this looks bad. Now, I think the clip you mentioned that he was still, I think, 11 points ahead of his opponent. So maybe for Alabama voters, this isn't a big deal. But I think in all of these elections, the candidates themselves often end up overlooking the point of this. The point of this is to get someone with conservative principles into office and to make people more willing in the future to vote for Republicans. This doesn't do that.
Sure. Amber, I think a lot of people in the Republican side who are keeping mum on Roy Moore or who are even defending Roy Moore are saying, look, I don't care. I don't care about 40 years ago. I don't care about his personal life. I want more freedom and I want less tyranny and I want more of my own money and I want less government and I want conservative social policy and I don't want crazy revolutionary social policy, and it's a razor-thin majority in the Senate right now. Do you think that that argument holds water, or do we have to hold this guy accountable if the accusations are at all credible and tell him, well, we're going to lose this race, but it's better than having someone who has committed these crimes in the Senate?
Well, I don't think it would be very conservative to not hold people accountable for their crimes, considering how much we believe in due process and how we believe that the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of whether or not that person is in a position of power. And I think in this case, you know, it's important to note that these stories are very well sourced. The Washington Post piece noted that the woman who made these accusations had told their mothers and their sister at the time. And then the woman who just came out had this yearbook note. She had a photo of a yearbook note that Roy Moore apparently left her. He signed it, "Love Roy Moore, DA," and then he called her beautiful in it. And I know if my parents saw that type of message in a yearbook from a 30-year-old man when I was 15, 16 years old, they would go nuclear. I mean, gosh, my dad would probably be in prison by now. So I think it's important to look at all of these accusations as a whole and not just, you know, each part on their own.
Mr. Bois, Your Eminence, should Roy Moore get out of the race?
It's certainly looking like that. Last week, when the allegations first broke, I said to myself, okay, I'm going to give it a couple days, see if the allegations remain credible and if they hold up to scrutiny. I certainly wasn't one to get quick in with the Washington Post or even believe them right off the bat, but it very quickly is looking like the allegations are credible. The one that came forward today is even more credible. Like Amber said, the yearbook. Yeah, I think that Roy Moore is probably guilty of these. And I also have a friend of mine who I won't name who's dealt with Roy Moore in the past previously, said when she was 18, he gave her his personal email address, which she felt was a little bit inappropriate and odd at the time. So, you know
Give me
what?
the email address. I want to get him on the show. Come on, pass it along, man. I'm not cute enough, and I'm not 18 anymore.
So, yeah, I think he needs to drop out.
When you've lost Paul Bois, you have lost. Paul Bois is slightly to the right of Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, the Vox Dei himself. Really bad. Not looking good. He might have to finally call this thing quits. But we'll see. They're pretty tough down there in Alabama. Maybe he'll say, I got 2 words for you, Washington Post, and they're not happy birthday. Who knows? Okay, we have a lot of news to get to. We have to get to the Democrats and New York Times' full-throated endorsement of segregation. We have to get to fake news from the New York Times, separate fake news from the New York Times, and we also have to get to the boycott Keurig campaign, not just because the coffee isn't good, but because we're defending Sean Hannity. Before all of that, I'm sorry, I know you guys want to definitely see more Amber and Roaming Millennial, and you'll tolerate more Paul Bois, but unfortunately, unless you subscribe to the Daily Wire, you can't do that. So you have to go to thedailywire.com right now. And by the way, the reason to subscribe just today is tomorrow is The Conversation. Be sure to tune in. It's our next episode of The Conversation, Tuesday, November 14th. That's tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, featuring, you guessed it, little old me. The Conversation will stream live on the Daily Wire website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. It will be free for everyone to watch, but only subscribers can ask the questions. So subscribe today. You get to ask me all of the most important questions. I'll give you my homemade kofefe recipe. There's a lot of information that you can get out of this. So do that. Subscribe right now. Join the conversation. If you subscribe, it's $10 a month, $100 for an annual membership. What do you get? You get me. You get the Andrew Klavan Show. You get the Ben Shapiro Show. Yada, 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 yada. You get, folks, the Leftist Tears Tumblr. Now, this is a little bit of speculation here, but if it turns out that these Roy Moore accusations aren't true, if he stays in this race, you're going to need to buy 25 Daily Wire subscriptions. It is going to be flooding everywhere. Already, just from Twitter and the New York Times, you'll have a steady supply, vintage 2017. But go over there right now. It is the most coveted, most kofefeted Tumblr for drinking leftist tears in the entire country. So go over dailywire.com. We'll be right back.